Thanks everyone for joining. This is our third of 4 trainings in this series to help you gain the confidence and skills to advocate with us as part of the Fairfax County Canopy Coalition, as we're calling it. This is tonight we're going to be talking about writing persuasively. You already know me, Renee Grebe, Northern Virginia Conservation Advocate, and I'm really happy to have Christine Montanese here tonight from Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. She'll be in the background, be helping with any tech you might have, questions, put anything you need in the chat box, and she will be there to help you. So just for context of where we are, we've already covered about how to talk about the value of trees in addressing the climate crisis and some starter tips on how to best communicate those values to decision makers. Then we got a great presentation last month from Citizens Climate Lobby on Advocacy 101 in terms of how you can best advocate in more personal one-on-one setting in Zoom or in person actually with decision makers. I'm not going to lie, I actually went back and watched it again for my own good because you just cannot be reminded enough how to prepare for those really tough one-on-one situations where who knows what will happen. Tonight, we're going to be talking about how to write a good comment letter. And then next month, we're going to be talking about how we can get you up and talking to the Board of Supervisors, or if you're in a different locale, not Fairfax County, how you get in front of your decision makers there. We're going to touch a little bit on that tonight as well, which is great. So diving right in, writing a darn good comment letter or testimony. We're going to workshop this tonight too. So get your favorite writing mechanism ready, if that's Word or piece of paper, pencil, Google Docs, whatever it is. We're going to have you draft some written comment letters today. Don't worry, it's not going to be that hard. So diving right in, this is our agenda for today. We're going to talk about the training part of it is going to be starting with the why, how you prepare, and what you're going to write. And then you trying it is going to be the scenario introduction, which we're going to share with you. And then we're going to dive in and draft a letter. And then what I didn't put here, but I think we're going to also try to do tonight is write some oral testimony as well, just in preparation for a longer training on it in January. So starting with the why. This is the golden circle from Simon Sinek's book, Starting with the Why, how great leaders inspire everyone to take action. The why is what is persuasive to other people, and advocacy is all about persuasion. You can and maybe should Google about what makes someone change their mind. You'll get lots of good advice on approaches to advocacy, some of them that we've touched on here too. There's lots of ways to approach advocacy. We already covered what we've learned about, one-on-one interactions, talking about benefits, connecting them to policy. So for today, we're going to talk about writing, and we're going to focus on the why and the how. You're going to own the what in this circle and what comes next, whether it's these one-on-one meetings or writing comments or testifying in person. That's going to come on your own time using the thinking and the techniques that you're learning throughout these trainings. So what's a comment letter? You don't need to read this. That's just an example of one we wrote. But when a government agency undertakes a significant action, environmental or otherwise, it has to put something in writing. And so commenting is the process that allows both the partner agencies and the general public review and provide input on those documents. And sometimes those opportunities to comment are required by law. And sometimes they're just opportunities to submit testimony that's been invited by an elected body that they decide that they want to get comments. And then many of you might have heard the comment of, if you don't have a seat at the table, pull up a chair. Same thing happens with writing comments. If there's not an opportunity to submit comments in a comment writing period, you can write comment letters at any time. There might be an issue you think deserves more attention or didn't have an official comment period, so just write it and submit it. Why? Why do you comment? We're all taking these trainings because you already know the importance of making your voice heard in decision making. And in a representative democracy, the agencies that are doing the people's work, we have a right to comment and they have a responsibility to listen. And you can help the agency, in theory, improve its decision making by your feedback. So when we think about preparing for an upcoming decision, the prep is arguably your biggest investment. we're going to break it down into these 3 sections of things that you can and should do before you start crafting your actual letter. So we're going to recommend that you learn how decisions are made, learn about the issue that you care about, and create a checklist. So when you think about how decisions are made, I'm just going to start at the highest level. You probably know all of this, but it's also just good to wrap our heads around the different levels of decision making. In the first class, we focused on Fairfax County decision makers, and we will again today. But the additional context here is at the very top of the chain, we know we have the President of the United States, currently President Biden. And then each state in the US also elects senators and congressmen to make decisions at the federal level. And those representatives work with the president. You've heard their names. We have 2 senators for the state of Virginia, currently Senator Warner, Senator Kane. Those are your senators. Those are my senators. There's also many congressmen, and they represent sections of Virginia, and the number of congressmen we get is based on the state's population. So we have 10 congressmen in Virginia right now. And where I live, Congressman Beyer is my rep over in the Franconia district of Fairfax County. You might have him, might have someone different. So he's just an example here on the slide. And then, mostly for local decision making, we don't usually work with these folks because they mostly focus on US laws, and maybe some of those might have a local impact. But generally, they're kind of outside of the scope of our training, even though all the techniques apply to talking with them as well. So in Virginia, we also have a Senate and a House, and they work with the governor of Virginia, who is currently Governor Youngkin. And in your area, you have 2 representatives. As an example, these are 2 representatives in an area near where I live, Senator Serval and Delegate Krizik. You'll have 2 different ones where you live. They make decisions at the state level. So for anyone who doesn't know, Virginia is a Dillon rule state. And that means that local decision makers, like our Board of Supervisors, need authority from the state of Virginia to make decisions, sort of like a kid needing to ask their mom for permission to do something. And so in this way, state representatives might very well be someone that we talk to as a decision maker. So it's good to know their names and who they are. The Virginia General Assembly is where they work. It's the legislative body of the Commonwealth. And this is kind of the one time of the year when all of the state senators and delegates get together and make laws. We call it like General Assembly time. This is going to run just after the new year, January 10th through March 9th. And we know from a tree-related perspective, there's going to be 7 or 8 tree-related bills this year. I work quite closely with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Every year they keep saying it's the year of the tree. And they said, no, really, this year is the year of the tree. We have a more friendly legislators in terms of the Senate and House, both being more conservation minded. And so that's really exciting. So there's going to be a chance to advocate at the state level, stay in touch with our action alerts, and stay in touch with what's going on because it moves super fast. So then here at the local level in Fairfax County, many of you might already know this too, we have a Board of Supervisors who makes decisions about many things, what gets built, how to implement new laws, ordinances. Our county has 9 districts, as you know, probably, and there's a representative from each of them. And we also have a chairman who's the head of the board. And we also have a planning commission. They're more advisory. They make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors about development-related issues. Not all of the decisions that the board makes come before the planning commission, but many of them do. So it's good to know your representatives on the planning commission as well. And now, even within these 2 structures of the board and the planning commission, those groups each have their own committees, like the environment committee, the land use committee. And in Fairfax County, those are committees of the whole. So you'll often have all of the members at those committee meetings as well. And oftentimes, some of the issues that we tackle come to those committees first before going up for decision making at the advisory level for the planning commission or the Board of Supervisors for the decision making. So you can often get in early by tuning in to see what the agendas are of those meetings and listening in or watching them because they're all recorded and available on the county's website. So even though the Board of Supervisors is the primary decision-making group here in Fairfax County, there's lots of other people who influence how decisions are made. Maybe that's the staff that they work with or other agencies that work alongside of the Board of Supervisors. So for different issues, there might be different people to talk to. It might be like the county executive's office, that's in Fairfax County if you're thinking about budget issues. But if you're thinking about park authority issues, that's a whole separate entity from Fairfax County government, as is the school board, totally separate. They work and they overlap in terms of budget requests and such for the board of supervisors, but they're wholly separate decision makers. They have their own boards. But then there's also staff in all these departments: Department of Environment and Energy, Transportation, Planning Development, Urban Forestry. There's a whole slew of them. Long story short, whatever issue you're following, the earlier you get involved, the higher likelihood that you'll be able to influence that final decision and the final outcome. So get to know the areas where this topic might be discussed. You can call your board of supervisors if you have a question or a concern, ask them how you get more involved, and they'll probably connect you with the right people to talk to. So when you learn about the issues you care about, we've got a bunch of tips. Stay connected with organizations like FACTS, Nature Forward, Sierra Club, anyone that is tackling the issues that you care about. When you work in groups, you can make progress faster. They might be doing research that is just too much of a heavy lift for you as an individual. So work with us. It's always great to get broader perspectives too. Think about working with even just neighbors that might not know the issues as well as you do, or might be as passionate. Get a broader perspective. You know, throw things at the wall with them and see how they react to it. That'll help you in learning about the issue because they might see things that you hadn't thought of. Read up on the background, any kind of prior decisions that were made, and all the draft documents. All these documents should be available electronically. You can do searches in the PDF for things that you care about, like stormwater or rain or native, if you're looking for native trees, canopy, runoff, green infrastructure. Skim the document to find what other words they might be using. And then maybe use that to kind of just spot check the document if it's something like a 500-page document, right? It's okay to skim that. You don't need to read every section of something that big. There might only be a subsection that's a part that you really care about. So when you have that document, take notes, write down page numbers that you want to reference later, so that you're able to easily navigate those documents. Also, don't just rely on what the county is providing you. Get outside, read the news, see what other locales are doing, and maybe figure out what the latest science on the issue is that you're tackling. So these examples of screenshots here are examples from the Parking Reimagined initiative, which had the stated goal of moving Fairfax County away from car-oriented infrastructure while they were updating their zoning ordinances for parking minimums and parking requirements. And for this, there was a lot of data outside of Fairfax County that we could read about, what that means, what the impacts were, what the benefits could be. And it was helpful to follow along too, to see what people inside of Fairfax County were saying about it. We got involved in this because of the perspective that if you reduce parking minimums, what do we get instead? Maybe trees as an option. And so we advocated hard for that. And we did get a small mention in the ordinance about this, and it might not have happened otherwise without that advocacy. So there might be some issues that might not seem like they might be tree related, but if you think it is, do some research. Attend webinars, hear from experts about the topic that you're looking at. If you can get a chance to ask questions or hear other questions that are being asked, that's fantastic. And even if a webinar isn't from your locale, it could kind of help unlock broader perspectives that you hadn't been considering. So for example, Nature Forward is just starting to get involved with the Virginia Data Center Reform Coalition. This is an organization that has formed with lots of different nonprofits in the area to learn about we are using them to learn about the impacts of our area from the massive influx of data centers. We are the world's hub. In the world, we have the most data centers in one place in Northern Virginia, and it's going to affect trees for sure, but even broader, our climate goals, water, air quality. It's going to have significant equity impacts and more. This is a really big one. I could read about it, but a webinar helps me really wrap my head around the data, right? So don't hesitate to tune in and learn more. And if it's a local issue that has something of a site to it, then go visit it. Nothing's better than firsthand experience. Both of these photos are from places that bike paths were being proposed. We went out to the one on the right because that area where there are no trees And where there's a sewer line right away, so there can't be any trees, it was not chosen for the area of the path. Instead, they've chosen an area for a forested location. So we wanted to get out and see why. What were the complexities there? What were the things that we didn't see just on a map as we were thinking about it, but when you get in person, might have been a reason why they didn't choose that. It's in an RPA, which is the area right next to a stream. And that might be one reason. So it really helps you when you're there firsthand. It helps you see the bigger picture, what's around you. If you're building a path, are there other places for paths? There might not be. You might find that the infrastructure is really bad and that this ends up being the best place for it. But if you don't have that firsthand experience, it can be really challenging to talk about it passionately. So, and take photos, right? When you're there, that gives you an opportunity to document it for yourself later, but also to add into your comments if you want. You could also take videos and prepare for video testimony. So think about those things. On-site visits can be really powerful. And then we talked about this a little bit in the first training. Link what you're learning to current policy goals. If it's going to be a new policy that they're developing, that's going to be a little bit harder. In that case, this point isn't too relevant. But if it's something like a rezoning or development application, the more you can link your comments to the need for decision makers to adhere to the current policy, the stronger your case is going to be. So, we talked about some of these policies, like the comprehensive plan, which is the policy plan that applies to all of Fairfax County, CCAP, the community-wide energy and climate action plan, Resilient Fairfax, or equity policy, One Fairfax, just to name a few. So the last step of preparing, it's as simple as it sounds. One slide, just create a checklist. What do you want to see in the decision document? As you're going through your research, you can be starting to take notes that will help inform this checklist, but lay it out so that when you get ready, you can really hang your teeth on some of these things that you've already thought of. So here are some text-heavy slides. After this webinar, you're going to get a pamphlet from the Environmental Law Institute. They are where we're pulling a lot of this great information from. It's going to have all the tips on it. It can be your, go-to document for helping to write comments. So you don't have to take super notes here if you don't want to. So you have your checklist. Use that to create an outline. That outline then can help inform how you're going to structure your letter. What will you say? How will you say it? Define your objectives. What do you want to accomplish? How are you going to get there? And then think about who you are to your audience. Why should they care about hearing from you? Introduce yourself. This gives you a chance to connect with the people who are reading the letter. If you have something in common with them, mention it. Give them context that you're a county resident, maybe which district you live in. Maybe you're an invasive management area leader and you're talking about invasive plants. Surface the relevant things about yourself that can connect you to the issue if you have them. If you don't have them, that's okay too. But if you're a resident and a voting member, definitely mention that. Make the strongest possible points in your letter. When you're thinking about how you structure the letter, these three things are really key to what content you're going to put in. Pound the law. If the law is on your side, point it out. If others have done something in maybe Fairfax County or Virginia, if someone has done something else in the state of Virginia in their locale in their county, then Fairfax County probably can too. So hold us, Fairfax County, to the higher standard. We did this when the county was deciding how to regulate agro-tourism. That's the ability to use farms as businesses and what sort of activities they can do. And that decision was going to directly impact the intentionally downzoned areas around the Occoquan Reservoir, because that is the drinking water backup supply for Fairfax County and DC. So we knew that they'd be able to put stronger regulations there because other locales had done it. So if the law is on your side, then pound some facts. If there's nothing you can really challenge on the law side, think about what you can bring to the table. Maybe it's emissions or quality of streams, anything. Think about if there are any facts that weren't included in the documents that you were reviewing, bring them to the table. Maybe there were linkages they hadn't thought of that would be helpful to surface. And then lastly, pound the table. If there are procedural things to call out, maybe you want to critique the process or the people involved in producing the document, that's also an option. And if you have any personal stories in any of those, make sure to bring them to the table as well. And then be as specific as possible. So in that agritourism example I just mentioned, when I researched the other ordinances across the state, I provided links to those locales and I said what the language was so that they could see. By the way, the board did not choose to protect the Occoquan with limiting the activities like other locales had done. It was very disappointing. But if you don't bring those facts to the table, then you don't even get a chance to argue it. Lastly, offer solutions. This is sort of like citing examples. If you have examples, those can end up being some of the solutions. But if you see a different answer to the question that's being posed, like propose it. No one likes criticism without ideas for a different way forward. So you don't have to be an expert on it, but you can provide proposed solutions and see that, demonstrate that you're dedicated to problem solving. Now, not every comment letter is about problem solving or getting to yes, but some might be. So if you have something that you can propose as an alternative, definitely do. Be sure to not be overwhelmed. Any comment letter is better than no comment letter. You do not have to be a scientist or a lawyer, and your values as a resident matter. So be clear about them. And if you can be concise, just keep in mind that poor person at the agency who has to read all of the letters that they're coming in. We're going to talk about how to make your letter as readable as possible in a moment. So I'm going to give you a scenario, which we're going to use for our 10-minute exercise of writing a comment letter. And based on this scenario, you're going to have a result at the end of it that you can use as your exercise. You don't need to take notes on this scenario. We have it all typed up for you, and Christine's going to drop the link in the chat box later when we're going to get started. So what do we have? In your neighborhood, students must walk to the local elementary school along a route that lacks sidewalks. That means they're walking in the street. For elementary school, that is not a good scenario. Even worse, when it rains, it becomes deeply flooded. Doesn't have any drainage. So kids are either walking like this in the water, or they have to walk somewhere else that isn't flooded, which means out further in the road. And that's really dangerous. And last year, a student was involved in a near miss accident on this route. So now people are really insisting that this get fixed before anything worse happens. So to solve the problem, the Department of Transportation issued a call for proposals to design a safe walk to school route. And the winning design favors rebuilding 4 major intersections and the blocks in between them to accommodate Americans with Disability Act sidewalks. So that's a requirement in order to receive the federal funding that they're hoping to get for this program. Those new sidewalks would be straight, uniform, 5 feet wide. The cost is proposed to be $15 million, with the majority of that, $12 million, coming from the federal government. So concerns we have are that the 5-foot wide sidewalks would result in the direct loss of 24 mature trees. And that's not good, because when you're walking to school, even though school isn't happening in the summer, it's going to be hot in the fall, in the spring, and the shorter seasons. You want to have that. It's also going to damage the root zones of several more trees. So even though those trees might be left, they may not make it very long. And secondarily, the part of the proposed design is to add curbs and gutters and then connect them to the storm drain system. So that means the water is going to run off into these storm drains very, very quickly. It's going to increase the storm drains that are going to be going into that nearby stream. So these are 2 concerns we have. So our Nature Forward recommended solutions. And again, we're going to give you all of this so you don't have to write it down. So one is to use green street technologies like bioswales that you can put right next to the sidewalks that will allow infiltration of the water so it won't be running off so quickly. And also permeable pavement to help the water also go down instead of rushing off the 5-foot wide sidewalks. Think about if we can redesign the sidewalk so it avoids the mature trees as much as possible. Keep the path 3 to 4 feet wide for most of its length. Reserve that 5-foot width for pinch points or where wheelchair passings could happen. And then use those existing wider spots like driveways to bypass points without having to add new wider sidewalks everywhere. So be a bit more flexible in design. Use technology such as tree bridging. This is more time intensive. It's like hand digging around the roots, filling that void with gravel, putting the sidewalk on top, and really protecting those roots of those trees. And then also, our proposal would cost more upfront, but better for the stream, help the county meet its Clean Water Act permits, and be able to tap into other sources of environmental funding. It's also going to probably help later that we don't have to do stream restorations because we're not affecting them as thoroughly as the runoff right from the stream, right from the storm drains would. So Christine, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and drop the document into the chat box for everybody. That's our scenario. So you'll have that as your backup when we're breaking for the 10 minutes. But right now, we're going to look at how to actually think about writing your comments in a stylish fashion so that when you're formatting it, it's the most readable it can be. Skimmability is helpful when referring back to your letter or when you want to get a point across without someone needing to read the full letter, because I can tell you they're not going to read the full letter if it's hard to get through. It's going to make it more approachable, skimmable, and ultimately actionable. So these are basic things, but it can be hard to forget, hard to remember when you're writing and writing and writing and get your words down on paper. Use headers and subheaders. Really separate your points. Bold, italics, underlines. You don't want to go crazy with your formatting, but think about what you can accentuate, the main points that you don't want them to skip. Don't forget to think about your order. Your outline should help with that. But as you start writing, you might change things as you go. Just make sure it's logical in the order. This is a really important one. Use declarative headers rather than generic ones. When you think about what your header might be, aquatic life in the draft plan. What does that mean? What does that say? But a more directive one could be the draft plan fails to consider impacts to quality life, aquatic life. That is great, right? That shows you exactly what your concerns are. Visually highlight and restate your recommendations at the end of each section. You can do that at the beginning, you can do it at the end. Whatever it is, make sure it's very, very clear. Obviously, avoid long sentences, dense paragraphs. Nobody likes those. And then be respectful. You know, as hard as it is, convey your points with a little bit less passion. I know we're all very passionate, but instead of the government should stop poisoning fish, just say something like the use of pesticides should be eliminated because they're documented harm to aquatic life. One thing we didn't put here, but I think is also important, is if your letter is really long, up front and again at the end in a summary, put your main asks. You might have points that you're making along the way, but there might be one thing like, do not approve this, this development plan, or please approve of this new ordinance. Put that very clearly at the front and at the back of your letter. You don't want to have to make your decision makers search for your asks because they won't. So this is our 10-minute exercise. The Department of Transportation is seeking public comment on the preliminary winning design. How will you head off potential objections? What will make the strongest case for your recommendations? So in 10 minutes, I want you to get your pieces of paper, virtual pieces of paper. You have the worksheet in the chat box. You don't need to research the problem or the major solutions. That's all in the scenario. Just assume those for this 10-minute scenario. Focus on how to frame it, how to structure your written comments, and how to format the argument to be as convincing as possible. So I have on my watch, it's 7:30 on the dot. So you're going to have until 7:40 to write your comments. So I'm going to go on mute. Feel free to turn your cameras off if they're on, and go ahead. You have 10 minutes. I'll check in at the 5-minute mark and check in at the 1-minute mark as well. We'll see you in 10 minutes. So fantastic. 10 minutes. It's a lot easier to write a comment letter when you have some good advice that you can start from. It's a lot harder when you have to do all that research. For folks that did the exercise, I would love to have you unmute or drop your thoughts in the chat box. What did you find with the exercise? What was hardest? What was easiest? Where would you invest more? Any feedback you have about writing a comment letter? We're a small enough group. Just go ahead and unmute and chat if you have something to say.
Brandon, I can start first.
Go ahead.
So if I didn't have those 4 ways to suggest, that was one of my hardest ones. So you need to know about that topic, and you need to know some basically technicalities of how to do it in a more sustainable environmental ways. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to suggest something outside of that. We had some scenarios similar to that in town of Vienna, that they built sideways all over and cut so many trees. And no one thought about these ways. So that was very smart to suggest those 4 ways.
That's great. Yeah, it's really helpful when you have an organization that has experience with the topic that you're talking about. Just like data centers, we haven't done anything with data centers, so I'm relying on research of our partners to do that. And advocates like you can rely on partners to do this kind of get this information as well. Douglas, I see your hand raised. Thank you.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time sort of struggling trying to frame my letter, because I was trying to incorporate the recommendations, but I was also trying to reach kind of a general audience that doesn't maybe, I mean, think about tree roots or how you preserve trees. They might think about it more abstractly, and trying to, also address concerns about safety. Because if kids don't have a safe sidewalk, that's a big deal. And so I found I spent honestly like 7 minutes just trying to figure out how am I going to be persuasive, because to me it was kind of safety was coming first, but I was also trying to talk about the value of trees as, for shading and for, just for managing stormwater and absorbing stormwater and things like that. So I did struggle with it.
That's a great call out of how do you make your letter technical enough for maybe staff who need maybe technical recommendations or suggestions for solutions, but also reach maybe people like board of supervisors who want to maybe have a more approachable take on these things. And so I think that's a great call out. Rebecca.
Yeah, well, I think too, the first thing I thought of doing was by saying, so thanks, Department of Transportation, for considering this safe walk to school project. As a parent and a resident of the county, it's an important topic. And then saying, but I'm concerned that there might be negative consequences coming out of it, so that they have a reason to read the letter. They don't think I'm about to tear down the whole project, because I felt like that was the tactical part. But also, it is important, right? Children walking through knee-deep water. And I'm going to say, I live right by the Gallows Bridge. They did reconstruction of my street's entry onto Gallows. The road work was not well done. So right now we have a chronic pool of water in the middle of an intersection that everyone walks through just to get to the other side. So I appreciate the problem of walking through water. They can't put the crosswalk striping in right now because of the puddle. So if they put it in, people would have to walk through the puddle right now. So,
Wow.
it's a small version of the same problem, which fortunately will be fixed. But yeah, you kind of say, look at those pictures of kids and say, do trees matter as much as that? So you have to mix the two.
Absolutely. And I really love that you drew from the Citizens Climate Lobby advice of start with thanks, start with praise, because they're not just trying to cut trees down for cutting trees down's sake. They're doing it for a reason. So I really love that approach.
And tell them how you relate to this, how this matter relates to your own life. I have children.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
that's great. Thank you. Mary.
I didn't realize until after I'd written the letter that I hadn't really targeted closely enough the recipient, who was my audience. And I wouldn't change it completely, but it seemed to me that it should go to someone like the director of public works, which the engineering would fall under. But then you could always CC the board or one of the commissions that you think, like the forestry commission or something like that, that you think would be interested in it. Then I didn't include all the asks, but included a lot more about how good their work was in engineering in the past, and this was a way to enhance it.
I love that, drawing from, again, some of the similar things that Rebecca said about the thanks. I really love that. And concentrating on points that are most important to you, right? You don't have to take every point that maybe a partner has put forth. Making that letter personalized is always really nice. That's fantastic. Yeah, I like the comments I'm seeing in the chat box too. That it's hard to get all the points and facts in the one letter. And that it's, it's helpful to have a base to start from. If you can get a partner's comment letter on the same subject, that can be super helpful. If you can get 2 or 3 partners' comment letter, that can be helpful, because then you might see different perspectives as well. So that's great. Well, if you haven't written comment letter before, congratulations on the exercise. And if you have, and this was just a helpful way to think about it, that's also awesome. It'll make it easier the next time. It literally is exercise. The more you do it, the more you're conditioned to do it in the future. So even though our next training is going to be diving into how to give oral testimony and go to testify in person, I'm going to give you some basic tips today, and we're going to try to fit in another exercise to convert what you just wrote into 2 minutes of testimony. So it's going to be really, really fun exercise. When you give oral testimony, we're going to do it to 2 minutes today, but you're often limited. It might be 3 minutes. Maybe it's 5 minutes if you're speaking on behalf of an organization, but it's fast. It's very short. So knowing how many words you can fit in that timeline can be really helpful as you're crafting your comments, and you'll figure that out as you know how you speak. We're going to go over this in detail too, but you'll need to sign up in advance, most likely, to do that. Or it's better, because then you won't be at the end of the line if you haven't signed up in advance. So think about that. We'll tell you the details of how to do that in Fairfax County for the Board of Supervisors, at least. For your oral testimony, you want to summarize your, the written points. That you want to get the most important messages forward. So sometimes it can be really effective to have a group of you go. So if you have a lot of people who are concerned about an overarching issue, but you each want to take different points, you can do that. You can sign up for a block of testimony. So you might have 3 people in a row, and each of you take 1 point. That can be a great way to spread it out. What you don't want to do is have 3 people say the exact same thing. Your decision makers will not be very happy having to listen to the same thing over and over, but you can say, I lift up their point and keep going. Just like you did in your letter, introduce yourself to begin. Make sure they know who you are and why you're important. If you want to try to fit in more content and you want to speak faster, don't do that. It's not helpful. You want to keep your points targeted. It is better to be clear and intentional than to rush through. If you've ever watched testimony that someone trying to rush, it just feels exhausting, and tune out a little bit. If you can, tell a personal story. In our demo of 2 minutes, that's going to be really hard, but when you have 3 or 5, you might be able to fit in a short anecdote. And practice, because you might think you can do it, but listen to yourself. Are you really going fast? Are there certain points that you trip over? So maybe you want to reword them or say it a little bit differently. All of these things are good advice. We're going to go over it in much more detail. When you think about being in the room, talking with decision makers, think about that every board is composed of individual people with different experiences, different points of view. They're people like you and me. So engage them, be respectful, address them like it's a conversation. They're probably not going to ask you questions back. That's just not usually how public hearings work. They might sometimes, but it's rare. And make eye contact. It can be hard when you have your written document in front of you and you want to read it. If you can't make eye contact and you're more comfortable reading, do that, because that's better than nothing. But if you can, look at your representative, look at the representative you know disagrees with you. Find a connection that you can. You see this guy on the right? There's a time and a place to be like that angry guy, but you want to do it sparingly. It shouldn't be standard practice to be yelling at your decision makers. There might be a time when that's appropriate, but it's like I said, you don't want to be that guy if you don't have to be. So let's take 10 more minutes to prepare oral testimony. Use case here is that in response to those written comments that you just wrote and submitted, that they need more public input, and they're going to hold a public meeting, the Department of Transportation, to take testimony on that proposed design. So the project manager, the winning designer, and the head of the agency will all be there. So that's your audience. And there's no proposed changes to the design yet, so we're still thinking about the same thing. So use your comment letter from exercise 1, take it as an outline, and take 10 minutes to prepare it and deliver it as a 2-minute testimony. I'm going to ask if anyone wants to give their 2-minute testimony at the end of it. So if you feel comfortable enough and you want to do that, that's great. Be fun. Reframe anything you've written as you need. You're only going to have about 250 to 300 words. You can use that as a guideline, but it's fast. It's very, very short. So it is 7:53 on my watch. I'm going to go back off camera. We'll stop the recording and take your 10 minutes to write your oral testimony. Thanks for taking that 10 minutes to write your oral testimony. Same thing. Anyone want to share either their direct testimony or any thoughts about writing it? Either one would be totally fine. You can use the raise hand functionality or turn your camera on and raise your hand. At some point, I would love to see all of you on the screen, and I can take screenshots like this.
I can start mine.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, I'll just read it. I'm taking this as a small part of one of the suggestions, hoping that others would have other parts. I said, thank you for ensuring the safety of our children in Fairfax County. I appreciate the hard work you and your team are putting into protecting the well-being of our community's youngest members. As a resident of Fairfax County and Fairfax Master Naturalist, I find myself compelled to voice my concerns about the potential loss of mature trees due to the upcoming construction. Fairfax has earned its reputation as a leader in green space, and it's imperative that we safeguard our mature trees for the sake of our children's future, while also ensuring their safety. The proposed construction would lead to the direct loss of 24 of these invaluable trees, and the potential harm to the root of others could have far-reaching consequences. We must incorporate green street technologies to mitigate this impending loss and preserve the precious shade that these mature trees offer to the children who walk the streets. One such technology involves the hand digging around roots, filling the voids with gravel, and then constructing the sidewalk atop this protective layer. While I understand that this approach may entail a higher upfront cost, the long-term benefits far outweigh the initial investment. Not only does this safeguard our trees, but also prevents potential issues that could arise involving our local streams, saving us from more extensive and costly repairs in the future. This would also help the county meet its Clean Water Act permit and tapping into other sources of environmental funding. Thank you once again for your commitment to the well-being of our community. Please consider our children's future in addition to their safety.
Thanks, Christine. One thing I didn't mention is that if you're submitting written comments too, one nice thing you can say is, and I've given suggestions in my written comments, refer to them. And that way you don't have to go into a level of detail in such a short time. But it's great if you can fit that level of detail in, that's fantastic, and raise up the ones that you are most important for them to hear if they don't read your letter. That was great though. Thank you. Anybody else want to either share their testimony or share how they felt about writing the testimony?
Hey, this is Douglas. I actually felt it was easier to write the testimony. It was easier to write it for speaking than it was to write something for like submission as written comments, because I don't know, there's a lot more you can do when you're speaking that just conveys how you feel in your positions, and also gratitude and connection that, I don't know. For me, it's a little easier to be colloquial when you're speaking. When you're writing, it seems, I mean, for me at least, it seems like every word matters. So that was just my experience.
That's a great observation. And it can be that you use those two things in tandem so that you can have your kind of policy wonky comment letter, or getting into technical details there that might be really actionable, but maybe your oral testimony is where you put the emotion and you surface, some of the things that are harder to convey in writing. I think that's a great call out. Anyone else? You don't have to. All right. Well, thank you all for writing that. I think these exercises can just really help you prepare before you actually have to get up in front of a board of supervisors group and have them all looking at you. I think all of you probably have heard the adage by now that just pretend everybody's in their underwear, right? That's how you help to like get past the nervousness of seeing everyone stare back at you. So that's always a funny thing to think about. But at that point, this is our training. So I want to open it up to Q&A. If you haven't, if we don't, you get some time back. We knew we'd be over an hour, but glad to know that we're under an hour and a half. Any questions that anyone has? Any thoughts?
Personally, I thought this was great training. I found that I think, writing the talking points for the letter was really helpful in organizing. However, when I came to write it, I found, or to say it out loud, there were too many words to say, whereas I thought I could be much more concise in writing it. Get to bullet points, and so I like your idea about keeping it emotional, maybe for the testimony, live testimony. So that was very interesting practice. Both of them seem to go together hand in hand. So presenting it both ways is really useful.
That's great. I'm with you. I personally find writing a little bit easier, which is funny. I feel like I can structure my thoughts. I can put a little bit of extra description. And oral testimony is hard, right? You heard it here. It's like it can be hard to get the pacing right or get the emotion right. And you'll practice that, right? So you'll get there eventually. Any other thoughts? Questions? Oh yeah, Barb. Oh, we can't hear you, Barb. You are unmuted, but it looks like maybe there we go.
Okay. Yeah. So I missed where you said this booklet was. Is there an online link that you can provide for us, or would be sending an email?
Yes, there'll be a follow-up email with the recording of the workshop, and the worksheet that we shared directly will be in that, and the pamphlet will come along with that as well. So look for that in the follow-up email, probably in about a week or whenever the recording gets processed.
Renee, I have a question. If we wanted to go online and see good examples of people giving testimony or examples of, well-written comments and letters, what would you suggest we do?
That's a great question. Well, not to tout our own coalition, but Fairfax Healthy Communities is a coalition of a bunch of nonprofits. You can go check out the home screen to see all the logos of folks. But we started posting our comment letters, and we don't write that many together. You can see they're kind of spotty. I think individuals of our organizations write a lot more comment letters. But here you can look at examples, and these are lots of organizations working together, covering lots of thoughts. So some of them can be quite long. But especially as we get into budget season next spring, you can kind of see what we've done as a coalition there. So I think that's a really good example. And then in terms of testimony, I'm going to try to find a link really quickly that I can drop in the chat box. You can go, this is not going to give you a direct link to good testimony. This is going to give you a link to all of the videos you can watch. So these are all of the Board of Supervisors meetings. There might be testimony in some of these. If I can dig up some good testimony, I will do that and make sure it gets into our follow-up email through Christine. But I think last year's budget testimony might be interesting because then you can kind of tune in and see a bunch of different things. I can go try to pull some of our Fairfax County Park Authority advocates who spoke. So look for that in the follow-up email. It's a good task for me to do. And maybe actually what I'll do, I think, is I'll get that for our next training in January. You can go poke around if you want here, but I'll make sure to prepare that since we're talking about doing oral testimony and giving testimony in January. I'll make that a task for them. So you'll have to come back to see good testimony. Any other questions? Comments? Well, if not, we would love for you to fill out your evaluation form before you leave. It'll also be in the follow-up email. So thank you so much. I'm glad that Christine has the shortcut link for that instead of the long one on the screen, but they go to the same place. It should be really quick. You can always give us your free form comments as well. And then next up, next year, we'll see you all next year. January 11th, that is going to be the day after General Assembly starts. So it should be really exciting because we'll be thinking about, at least I will be thinking about state level testimony and bills that are coming, but we're going to be talking about how to testify in Fairfax County. So we're going to make it really actionable. We're going to cover more in depth what we talked about today, but also just how you step through the process of actually getting to testify. So that's all we've got for you today. Thank you everyone for giving us your time this evening. It was great to have you all here. If you have any questions, you can always reach Christine or I. Don't hesitate to do that. I think you can always write back to Christine's reminder emails to reach either of us. Thanks everyone.